That was the night Mr. Gray entered their lives.
More specifics now, although you seem to dislike the word. Who finally was this Mr. Gray of yours? Until now, you've made him seem like a phantom flickering in and out of your lives.
He worked for the government, the federal government. My father said that Mr. Gray had been involved from the beginning, from the time my father first gave testimony. He'd been on the sidelines, watching, waiting.
A bodyguard?
No, more than a bodyguard. My father said he was one of the original men involved in a new government department.
What was this department?
Let me think a moment.
5-second interval.
I remember the title now. The U.S. Department of Re-Identification. It was supposed to protect people, to provide people with new identities, so they could hide.
Hide from what?
From those they testified against.
I am afraid it's not entirely clear to me.
Let me try to remember exactly what my father told me.
5-second interval.
My head is beginning to hurt, to pound.
Do you wish a pill?
No, I don't trust pills anymore.
Does that mean you don't trust me anymore?
I'm not sure of anything right now. Give me a minute to think about all the things my father told me, all the things we talked about. How they talked. Or rather, his father talked, and Adam listened. But Adam also asked questions. 100, 1,000, it seemed. During those first few days after the discovery of his identity and the lives they led, he and his father talked incessantly, the terrible silence finally broken. Sometimes they talked in the paneled room in the cellar, and at other times outside, walking the streets, sitting in a restaurant, lounging on a park bench. His father explained why they covered so much territory. The paneled room was a safe room. It had been searched for bugs, listening devices, by Gray's men and given clearance. If they didn't talk in that room, it was best to conduct their conversations while they were on the move, coming and going, in public places, where the chances of being overheard or eavesdropped on were negligible. It was during these conversations that his father brought him up to date, told him how they had become involved in this new life of theirs. In the final analysis, his father said, we really had no choice. Gray spelled out the options, the alternatives. He had helped to develop the Department of Re-Identification. The department had grown out of a sudden need as people began to testify against organized crime. The first people to give testimony were criminals themselves, members of the organizations and syndicates who, for one reason or another, decided to turn against their own kind. In exchange, they asked protection. The early cases were provided with bodyguards, nothing else. Some of the first witnesses were convicts, and they had to be transferred to prisons where they couldn't be reached by the organizations. In some instances, new identities were created for witnesses who weren't in jail. They began new lives under assumed names. Adam and his father were walking by a schoolyard where some kids, mostly girls, were playing hopscotch and other games, their shouts and laughter innocent on the afternoon air. Adam suddenly felt like an alien. Gray explained the situation, his father continued, unaware of the children and the sunshine, head down, his eyes cruising the sidewalk. My life, as I had known it, he said, was ended. It was a matter of time before a bullet or a bomb or some other weapon finished me off. He had been my watchdog from the beginning. He and his men had alerted the police department when the bomb was placed in the car. One of Gray's men had shot the assassin who had impersonated the cop outside the newspaper office. Gray said that sooner or later the assassins would succeed. I couldn't be allowed to live, for a lot of reasons, the least of which was revenge. I had to be made an example to other people who might want to become witnesses. And they still didn't know how much I had really learned during the investigation, how much I could still tell the authorities, or how much I knew then that wasn't worth much, but might become important if later disclosures were made. His father kicked at a stone, watched it roll into the gutter. I'm not the hero type. I get scared too easily. But I tried to reason with Gray. I told him that I would take my chances, that this was still a free country, a country of laws, and that a citizen shouldn't have to go into hiding for his own protection. But Gray pointed out the clincher. He said that the bomb in the car hadn't been aimed at me alone, but at whoever happened to be in the car when it exploded. And most likely that would be my family. He said that you and your mother weren't any safer than I was. Not as long as I continued to be Anthony Del Monte, resident of Blunt, New York. I remained unconvinced, feeling that there was something wrong somehow with our entire system, until I returned home after Gray's visit with me at the office and learned that your mother had received a phone call. A simple and brief phone call in which someone quietly informed her that 2 funeral masses would be reserved in the next week at St. Joseph's Church for her husband and son. Her punishment was that she would be allowed to live. The sun had no right to be so bright, the shouts of the playing children so happy. That night I called Gray, using a special number he had given me.
Thus, your family came under the protection of this Department of Re-Identification.
Yes, but it was different in those days. My father said they were amateurs at that kind of thing. Today, there's an official witness re-establishment program, that's the official name now, with authority handed down by Congress. It's all smooth and cool and streamlined. Entire families are relocated, provided not only with new identities, but with complete family histories, all documented, official. It's almost foolproof. But in those days, the program was new. We were one of the first families involved. There was money enough. In fact, my father said a trust fund was established to finance my college education. But there were a lot of rough edges. Gray and his people had to improvise, and sometimes they goofed.
How did they, as you say, goof?
Well, the birth certificates, for instance. When Mr. Gray brought us our new certificates, my birth date had been changed from February 14 to July 14. Mr. Gray was furious, my father said. He wanted us to keep our original birth dates so there'd be less confusion, less chance of slipping up accidentally and giving the wrong date in the future. My mother was upset too. She said a mother simply couldn't accept a change in the birth date of her son. So Mr. Gray arranged for another certificate.
But your father kept both, you said.
He was afraid of another goof, that the July 14 date might have been recorded somewhere, and that I might need it in the future. So he didn't destroy it. He said it might have been a mistake on his part, but that he too had to improvise in those days. And the names. Adam could still hear his father's voice, a mixture of anger and disgust when he talked about their new names. Farmer, for God's sake. Gray and his bunch came up with Farmer. White American Protestant. WASP. And here I am Italian and your mother Irish. And both of us Catholic. Your mother a devout Catholic who never misses Mass on Sunday or on holy days. Gray resorted to more improvisation, suggesting that the Farmer family be converts to Catholicism. This meant baptismal certificates, confirmation papers. We were like puppets, you, your mother, and I, his father said, as if we had no control over our lives. And we didn't, of course. Others pulled the strings and we jumped. Sometimes I think someone with a terrible sense of humor was toying with us. Look at the name they selected for you. Adam. Somebody's whim, maybe. Adam, new birth, first man, I don't know. Your mother and I felt helpless, but the thought of that bomb and that phone call made me go along. And so we found ourselves in Monument, Massachusetts.
Why Monument? Why this city out of so many others?
You sound bored.
Please, no more judgments on me.
As if you've heard all this before, and you're only going through the motions.
Time is too valuable to hear banal information repeated. If I knew why your Mr. Gray chose Monument as your new home, Would there be any logical reason why I would ask you about it? 10-second interval.
I guess you're right. As usual. As far as Monument was concerned, my mother insisted on staying somewhere in the Northeast, my father said. Mr. Gray agreed, but not for sentimental reasons. He said it was a matter of lifestyle, of blending in with our surroundings. We'd have been conspicuous, say, suddenly turning up in Texas. So Mr. Gray arranged for us to settle in Massachusetts. Actually, the distance wasn't a problem, he said. Even without all the elaborate arrangements, there was little chance of anyone tracing us back to Blunt.
What's the matter? You've suddenly grown pale. 7-second interval.
Let me take it easy for a minute or two.
23-second interval. What has upset you?
Something I remembered as I was talking. The reason why Mr. Gray wasn't worried about anyone tracing us back to Blunt. The cellar again. With his father. His mother upstairs. His father reached inside his jacket and pulled out an envelope. A narrow manila envelope, slightly larger than letter size. He held the envelope in the palm of his hand for a moment, as if his hand were a scale and he was trying to determine its weight, its value, its importance. Finally, he unsealed the envelope, carefully lifting up the Scotch tape that crisscrossed it. He withdrew something that looked like a newspaper clipping, yellowed, fragile. He handed it to Adam. This was the insurance Gray said he was providing us with, his father said, his voice filled with a bitterness Adam had never heard in his father's voice before. Adam looked down at a 5-column headline that preceded a long news story. He didn't have to read the story. The headline told him all he needed to know. Blunt reporter, wife, child, killed in crash on highway. I sat there, looking at the clipping and thought, I'm dead. I've already died.
Was it a shocking thought?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure of anything anymore. I think I was numb. The way I'm numb now.
Do you wish to suspend? It's been a grueling time for you. Important but grueling. A real breakthrough. But I think you should rest now. We can seek more details later.
Yes.
Let us suspend then. End tape OZK012.
I emerge from the drugstore and walk to the parking meter, and my bike is gone. The 5 o'clock crowd passes by on the sidewalk, hurrying home from the office or the factory, feet scurrying over the pavement. A bus halts with a hissing and its doorway exhales people. Traffic lights flash on and off and car horns sound. And I stand there, isolated by myself on a small, invisible island, and I look at the spot where my bike had been. I shouldn't have left it there unguarded. I have my father's package in my hand, and I hold it tightly, pressing it against my body, afraid that someone will rush by me and tear it from my grasp. I feel vulnerable, a headache beginning, a migraine maybe, a small spot of pain like a tumor throbbing in my forehead above my eye. I touch the spot with my hand as if the pain is visible, touchable by my fingers. But mostly, I stare dumbfounded at the spot where my bike had been. I look around to see if someone has played a trick on me. A prank has hidden the bike somewhere nearby. The mouth of an alley looms between 2 stores, and I glance into the alley. Nothing but a few newspapers rolling in the wind, a rubbish barrel, and a cat with arched back poised next to the barrel. The cat hisses, and I turn away, glancing up and down the sidewalk. I encounter only strangers, and no bike. But the alley draws me again. If I had taken a bike, I'd have gotten out of there fast, and the most likely route was the alley. A quick getaway, instead of the open exposure of the street where someone could yell, "Stop, thief!" I returned to the alley. It's narrow. Barely room for a boy on a bike to pass through, but I enter anyway. Running through the narrow passage, my shoulders brushing the rough brick exterior. The alley is so narrow that claustrophobia threatens me again, and my palms turn wet with perspiration, while drops of sweat gather in my armpits. I plunge onward, through the alley, bursting finally out of it, and find myself in a deserted area behind the Main Street buildings. Rubbish barrels, a derelict car without wheels sunk in the ground, boarded up windows. Dusk hides whatever is in corners. "Lose something, honey?" I whirl around, surprised at the voice, because there's no one or nothing there. "Up here," the voice says, a faint southern accent softening the words. He's standing on the fire escape landing, above me on the second floor. Squinting, I see that he is huge, a mountainous man, with a white shirt, open at the chest, although it's cold in the New England dusk. As my eyes become accustomed to the twilight, I see that his face is moist, his plump cheeks wet, his forehead soaked. He has a handkerchief, and he dabs ineffectually at his forehead. He leans against the iron railing of the fire escape, and the railing creaks in protest. Instinctively, I back away a step or two, afraid that the entire structure will collapse, come crashing down. Had he called me honey? "Somebody stole my bike," I say. "I left it in front of a store only for a minute or two, and when I came out it was gone." "That's right, honey. They'll steal anything these days. There used to be a saying, they'll steal anything that's not tied down. But these days they'll steal anything, even if it is tied down." The more he talks, the more pronounced his accent becomes. I wonder if he can see my frown of distaste as I look at his monstrous body, all that sweat on a cold evening, and the way his lips pronounce the word honey. He repels me, but I'm sure he knows something about the bike. Why had he asked whether I'd lost something when he saw me standing there? "Did you see anybody come running through here with a bike?" I ask. "You stay in one place long enough, you see a lot of things," he says, his tone taunting now, as if he wants to play a game. "Know what's hard? Being this way, stuck in a cage this way, and having to wait for everything to come to you, not being able to go after anything. See what I mean?" I see what he means. The iron railings and banisters and rungs of the fire escape are cage-like, and he is a prisoner in his weight and his bulk. "You live up there?" I ask, not wanting to play games, but not wanting to arouse his anger. He wouldn't tell me anything if I turned him off too fast. "In an apartment here, 4 rooms. I look out the front windows at Main Street, and I stand here on the fire escape and look at the back alleys." He gestures behind him at a wide door, the kind of door through which deliveries are made. "At least the place has a good enough door. So I sit and wait and look, or I stand and wait and look, and sooner or later I see something." "I hope you saw my bike," I say, "and whoever took it. Folks lose things, they sometimes put an ad in the paper. You know, saying, 'Lost, one bike, Main Streeter hooks it, reward.' Reward, honey, that's the key. You get something, you got to give a reward." His voice drips with a heavy southern accent now, and he pronounces reward as reward. But there's something more than a southern accent in his voice. Something else lingers there, but I don't want to recognize it. I'll give a reward, I say, almost imitating his accent. I've got $25 to give as a reward. There's all kinds of rewards, honey, he says. There's rewards and rewards. And now, in the dusk, he begins to scratch at himself, scratching his chest where his shirt is open and where curly hair glistens. He scratches with both hands, descending to his stomach. All kinds, he says, his voice lingering in the twilight. I am conscious again of the migraine, the throb in my forehead. A wave of nausea crests in my stomach, and I taste acid and bile. All I want is my bike, I say, my lips trembling, and I'm sad and angry at the same time because I feel like a small boy again, still the coward I always was. There's a whimper in my voice, and I hate myself for the whimper. And I hate the fat man up there on the fire escape for reducing me to this state. I also hate whoever took my bike, and now I throb with more than a migraine's pain, but with hate and anger. I stand helpless before him, shaking and trembling in the chill of evening, and I feel tears of helplessness and rage cold on my cheeks. His huge figure wavers in the wetness of my tears, as if he is somehow under water. "Aw, tell him who's got his bike," another voice intrudes, a sharp voice, with the flint of New England in the words. I wipe the tears away. The fat man sighs a huge sigh that's like a wind able to topple trees. "Go ahead, tell him." The voice comes from inside the apartment, behind the fat man. The huge folds of flesh form a pout on the man's face. "Never can do what I want," he says, himself a little boy now. "Tell him, Arthur," the voice says. "The Varney boy, Junior, he took your bike," the man says. "Come through the alley there about 15 minutes ago. He's always stealing something. Someday they're going to put him away." "Where does he live?" I ask, sniffing, wondering how he can stand the cold. "Up a main street, next to the First Baptist Church." That's a joke. Junior Varney, biggest thief in town, living next to a Baptist church. "You come in, Arthur, it's getting cold out there," the voice of the unseen man calls from inside, gently now, tenderly. The big man looks down at me with a sadness in his eyes. Mournfully he says, "I never get to do nothing." "Thanks," I yell up, not at the big man, but at whoever's inside. For some reason, I look at the massive man and find myself saying, "I'm sorry." I'm still sick to my stomach, and my head throbs, and I dread the prospect of tracking down Junior Varney, and I'm still repelled at the lewdness of the big man, but he really looks caged as he turns slowly away on the fire escape. So I say, "I'm sorry," again, and then I get the hell out of there.
Tape OZK 013-0800. Date deleted, TA. You're looking well this morning.
Thank you.
You're alert.
I feel alert.
We are making excellent progress, are we not?
A lot of things are clearer now. Not everything, but enough. They give me the chills sometimes, but the chills are better than the blanks.
Good. I mentioned the necessity of specific details.
You're always talking about specifics. What kind of specifics?
I mean specific details as opposed to general information.
You mean details of our lives in Monument and how we came to be there?
Yes, that, of course. Also the whys of your presence in Monument.
But I've told you that. My father gave testimony, and this placed him in danger.
Did he ever tell you about his testimony, its nature?
No, there wasn't time.
What do you mean there wasn't time? 9-second interval.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
You appear troubled. You're frowning. Is anything the matter?
Like a cloud, hanging in the distance, in his mind, something dark lurking there. And the edge of panic again, a shiver in his bones, deep in his marrow.
Perhaps this line of questioning is disturbing you. Why not let the thoughts flow freely?
All right. It's just that, for a minute there, I felt the blankness again. There are still blanks, you know.
And we shall fill those blanks eventually. Think of how far we've come to this point.
Do we still have a long way to go?
That depends.
You mean it depends on me?
To a certain extent, yes. And on these sessions, and the medicine. Tell me, did you grow close to your father after you had discovered the truth of the situation?
Yes. We spent a lot of time together. He kept apologizing for the predicament he had placed me in. Had placed my mother in, too. But I was proud of him, really. I mean, he had done what he believed to be right. He had given up his career. He remembered asking his father, tentatively, afraid that he was invading his privacy, how much it had hurt him to start life over, to give up his old life, his career, his friends. Adam thought how terrible it would be if he had to leave Monument now, to give up Amy and start again in a new town, a new section of the country. Of course it hurt, Adam, his father said. But it hurt your mother most of all. I didn't mind leaving Blunt. I had always figured that my career lay elsewhere. I had those dreams a young guy has. Dreams of going to distant places, fame, all that stuff. But your mother loved Blunt, the people especially. The hardest thing for me, and I still miss it, was giving up newspaper work. I still hope that the situation will change and I'll be able to go back into the business someday. Gray figured it was too risky for me to continue in the same profession. Insurance didn't appeal to me. But the department always keeps its eye out for legitimate businesses they can buy or take over that one of their witnesses can operate. The insurance agency was available for me at the time. We had to build a new life, Adam. It was hard, naturally. But when you think of the alternative, we were glad to have a chance. There's always fear, though. Even today. Gray said our tracks are covered. 3 bodies cremated 10 years ago in Blunt, New York. But who knows? Who really knows? Why does Mr. Gray come here to Monument so often? To keep in touch. He brings a special bonus of money twice a year. He also drops in to keep me up to date on developments. He also brings reassurances that we're still safe. Once in a while, he probes my memory for some lost fact, some overlooked detail that subsequent developments have made important. And there's another reason. He's never mentioned this reason, I only suspect it. I think he's keeping an eye on me. But why? I don't really know. Maybe to see that I haven't been reached by the other side. They were always on the move during these conversations, talking in snatches as they strolled the streets, visited the bazaar at St. Jude's Church, exchanging information as Adam aimed the ball at 3 wooden bottles arranged in a pyramid. Once, they went to a drive-in movie, and his father turned down the speaker while they conversed. A John Wayne film on the screen. Adam had forgotten the title. But he remembered asking his father why all these precautions with Mr. Gray were necessary 10 years after the testimony and threats. Watching John Wayne swagger across the street, gun riding low on his hip, his father said, "Because nobody knows how powerful these organizations, maybe there's more than one, are today. Nobody knows how far they might have penetrated the government." Adam was reluctant to use a certain word, but he went ahead anyway, pulling his eyes away from John Wayne on the screen. "Does it involve the Mafia, Dad?" The word sounded ridiculous coming from him, melodramatic, belonging on a movie screen maybe, but not in their lives. "I can't say who or what, Adam, for your own protection. Anyway, the Mafia is only a handy word for people to use. There are a lot of words to describe the same thing. As far as time is concerned, the evidence I gave has been used and reused. But there's a catch. No one knows whether I divulged all the information, everything I knew. That's another reason for all this surveillance. And maybe it's the real reason for Gray's trips here. He keeps probing for more information, and I tell him there isn't any more, that I've held nothing back. And he just looks at me. That look gives me the chills. Sometimes I think I'm an annoyance to him, an embarrassment. Sometimes, when he visits, we sit there like enemies. Or as if we're playing a crazy game that neither of us believes in anymore. But the game has to go on.
This information your father talked about, did he ever reveal its nature?
No.
Weren't you curious about it? After all, the information changed your lives.
He said he couldn't tell me, for my own protection. And I didn't press him for the information.
He said he told Gray that he was not holding back anything. Was he specific to you about that?
I don't know what you mean.
I mean, did you ever ask him whether he was telling Gray the truth or whether he was just being clever? 9-second interval. Why the sudden silence? You're looking at me in a strange manner.
I think it's just the opposite. You're looking at me very strangely. It reminds me of what my father said about Mr. Gray. My father said the look on Mr. Gray's face gave him the chills, as if they were enemies. And that's the way you were looking at me a minute ago. That look on your face when you asked about the information that my father...
I'm sorry that you were disturbed by the expression on my face. I, too, am human. I have headaches, upset stomachs at times. I slept badly last night. Perhaps that's what you saw reflected on my face.
It's good to find out you're human. Sometimes I doubt it.
I understand. It's just as well if you take out your anger on me. I don't mind.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Whenever we approach truths, basic truths that you've been trying to deny or hide, you turn upon me. But I understand. I'm the only other target that's available.
What do you mean, the only other target? Who's the first target, then?
Don't you know?
You mean me? I get tired of all this. The way you twist things all the time.
You see, the anger again, just as it happened when we were approaching an important area.
What area?
The information your father had, the information you say he didn't give you. 15-second interval.
Adam felt himself shriveling into the chair. Figuratively speaking, of course, because he knew that on the surface, he was just sitting here as usual, looking at Brent. Brent, whom he was convinced now was not a doctor at all. But then, who was he? Adam recoiled from the possibilities. Was he an enemy? One of those men who had been his father's enemy? He felt the panic rising in him again and fought to remain still, fought to ride out the panic as Brent had always suggested. And he realized that he was dependent on Brent. Whether he was an enemy or not, Brent had helped him discover himself, who he was, where he came from. Could he help him discover what he was doing here, in this place? So he knew he had to rely on Brent, but he would be careful, wary about the information Brent wanted. And he thought, was there really information lodged within him that he didn't know about? Was Brent then right, after all? His thoughts scurried, like rats in a maze.
Are you ill?
No, I'm all right. All these discoveries, they keep throwing me off balance.
That's understandable.
The worst part is that my memories arrive piecemeal, in bits and pieces. The entire picture isn't clear.
Let us take it all one step at a time.
Yes.
We were speaking of your father, how he was telling you about the past. Let your mind wander in that direction, you and your father.
His father's explanations went on over a period of weeks. Adam's questions were endless, and the information he received sometimes made him shake his head in wonder and surprise. How can you be intimate with people, live with them 24 hours a day, and not really know them? He was amazed at the deceptions that had been carried on by his parents through the years. Like his father's glasses. Plain window glass, brought to Monument by Mr. Gray, the style changing every 2 or 3 years. That's why I avoid Dr. Huntley, the optometrist down the street from my office. I told him once that my closest friend is an optometrist in New York City, and that's where I got my glasses, his father explained. His father's mustache was also part of the deception. He hadn't worn a mustache as a reporter in Blunt. He had also given up cigarettes. That was torture, Adam. But Gray insisted, and your mother was delighted to see me stop smoking. She said it was one of the few good things about our new lives. I'm still dying for a smoke today. Adam's questions seemed endless. Did you and Mom ever actually live in Rawlings, Pennsylvania? Adam asked, telling his father of the visiting editor Amy had called him about. No, but we were flown there for a weekend visit so that we'd be acquainted with the town, the layout of the streets, the buildings, the feeling of the place, in case we ever encountered anyone from Rawlings. I remember standing outside the newspaper office there thinking, I'd like to meet the editor, talk shop. But I didn't. In fact, I've always avoided talking to Amy's father, afraid that I might betray myself. His father's voice was wistful. What about his mother, and those telephone calls to the woman who was Aunt Martha? His father explained that Martha was a cloistered nun in a convent outside Portland, Maine. She was his mother's only living relative, and Gray had allowed arrangements to be made for the weekly calls. It's the only risk Gray ever allowed, although it was a minimal risk, he said. Your aunt had never lived in Blunt, and she had gone away to the convent as a teenager. A cloister is closed to the outside world, Adam, never a visitor. Gray was able to arrange for a special dispensation to allow that weekly call. Your mother's only link with the world she once knew. I am curious about something.
What is that?
You never ask about my mother, only my father. As if you're not interested in her at all.
You are mistaken. It is you who doesn't speak of your mother. I have told you before, I am merely a guide. I do not lead you. 15-second interval.
I want to talk about my mother. I mean, I want to find her in all these discoveries I'm making.
By all means. Go ahead. 10-second interval. What's the matter? Why the delay? Relax, take it easy. 5-second interval.
Nothing. I can't even remember her face right now.
Take your time. She is there, a part of your life. She will come.
And she did, of course.
Giddy up, Demo.